Getting to the heart of the matter. Back to Guy, Ben, and Frank with more Inside the News.
Welcome back to Inside the News. Glad to have you with us. This is an election trail segment, but pretty much our whole program has been devoted maybe across the map as far as election and global elitism and all. And Frank, let's start with you. Frank Vernuccio, Ben Brunson, myself, Guy Wehman with you on the program. And Frank, I believe that the independents, and there are a good degree of Democrats that want a more positive America. And yet coming out of the DNC convention, they are saying that we're living in a state of darkness when it's really far from that. I think Donald Trump brought us out of darkness in 8 years. And these past 3 years, he's actually opened the doors, got rid of regulation. A lot has happened, Frank.
Yeah, the problem with the Democrat message is that they point out what they see as problems, what they see as wrongs, and they offer no viable solutions whatsoever. You're not electing a whiner in chief, a complainer in residence. You are trying to appoint someone or elect someone who is going to solve the problems that face the country. The only thing we saw coming out of the Democrats in their convention was that they want to turn the United States into Venezuela, basically, and that hasn't worked out so well for the people of that great country. You need to see from the Democrats some, at least smidgen of a solution, which they simply failed to do. One of the reasons why they have been so allergic to really open discussions, to really open debates, is that they've got nothing at all to offer. They can point out the problems continuously, but simply fail to point out any solutions that look remotely viable.
Ben, I would even suggest that the Democrats are actually projecting what they want to do is to bring us into darkness. And what they're doing, they're trying to put it upon the Republicans or the conservatives or the GOP, but it's really what they want to do. But if they can push it to the other guys, they get a chance to go in there and they'll look like the savior.
You know, it goes back to Saul Alinsky's Rules for Radicals, which is always an interesting read if you take the time to read it, because you see a lot of that book being implemented. This concept of creating chaos, of rot from within, of destroying history and changing history to meet your narrative. All of these elements are very much on display, unfortunately, in this country. The progressive ideology has pretty much captured the educational class from really grade school all the way through all our universities. And one of the elements, as you mentioned, is to sow chaos and to use that chaos, that division, that strife to impose stern rules and to gain power. Of course, in Germany, there was all sorts of things like the Reichstag fire, which enabled Hitler to gain more power, to get more power passed through the Reichstag. And these are age-old tactics. So it is part of what we're seeing at play here.
Frank, to educate our audience here, Saul Alinsky, we've referenced him many times on this program. Was he that great of a thinker back in his day? I mean, was he that popular and looked upon, or was he some outside guy that tried to stir up trouble amongst, and was not amongst the popular movements?
Well, he was sort of a guiding light of tactics and strategy for the hard left. And just as Ben said, his tactics and strategy are something that have been copied and followed rather faithfully by the American left in the 21st century.
But have they been successful in doing that? I mean, we've been, I say the greater America is trying to push back upon this. And go ahead, Frank.
If your question is whether they have been successful in solving America's problems, the answer, of course, is no, they've made them worse. If you're asking whether they've been successful as a political strategy to getting their ideas out there, they have been successful. Look, let's be blunt. The entire American educational system has bought into Saul Alinsky. Most of the Democrats have bought into Saul Alinsky and his tactics and strategy. But you have to understand the difference between what the left wants to do and what the center and the right want to do. The goal of the center and right in the United States is to address problems, to improve the country, to solve problems. The goals of the left in the United States has been simply to get into power and to keep that power. So if the question is whether Saul Alinsky has been successful in guiding the left into getting more power, both politically and in the wider culture, unfortunately, he's been very successful. His philosophy has been very successful.
Yeah, Ben, your thoughts on that very thing, because you brought him up.
Well, let's keep in mind the goal of Saul Alinsky. It wasn't change, it was revolution. Saul Alinsky was all about bringing about a Marxist revolution and putting Marxist revolutionaries into power by any means necessary. And he recognized that you had to lie, cheat, and steal to do that. Just like when Castro came along and he told the world he was absolutely not a Marxist, he was a good Catholic man who just wanted to see the working class and Cuba do better. And of course, as soon as he got into power, he outed himself as a revolutionary Marxist who turned to Moscow. And the Cuban people paid the price ever since. So this is what Saul Alinsky was all about. And you can read about it in his book. And unfortunately, he's had a lot of success in influencing the Democratic Party, which we talked about earlier, has essentially embraced the socialist policies of Bernie Sanders.
Okay, Frank, can the GOP take both houses, and what kind of a bounce can the RNC expect after their convention?
Well, let's start off with the polls. And the polls have become notoriously unreliable. We saw how the polls were completely wrong in 2016. Professional pollsters, including some who have worked for me, have said that polls at this point are just almost a waste of time. With the advent of cell phones over landlines, people are telling pollsters what they think the pollsters and those around them want to hear rather than what they actually believe. Can the Republicans capture the White House in both houses? I think they're looking good, I think, for the White House. I think they will retain the Senate. The House is a little more difficult to predict because in many cases, people vote for their local representative, not so much on ideology, but whether he wrote a letter on my behalf. Did he get my kid into a school based on his recommendation? That's a lot harder to predict. The one thing that might look promising for the Republicans is the vast enthusiasm gap. There is certainly a difference between how Republicans see this election. They see it as a very urgent thing. They are enthusiastic about the top of the ticket. The Democrats, not so much.
Boy, he really hit on something there. And Ben, your take on that in our last minute or so.
I agree with most of that, except I'll probably reverse what happens in Congress. I'm very concerned about the Republican ability to hold the Senate because the math, it works strongly against them this time around. I'm a little more optimistic about their ability to perhaps take back the House, and enthusiasm plays a big factor in local House wins, and I think that's where it may play out. Whether they can hold the Senate, it may be touch and go, and it may come to some races like in Michigan, where you could have an unexpected Republican win.
All right, this is Inside the News. We're going to take a time out. We're going to be back with Picking Up the Pieces segment. We're going to talk about the virus and possible vaccine, and you'll be surprised to find out what's going on in Iowa and Colorado. Is the Green New Deal out there? Oh, my goodness. We'll be back.
You're listening to Wehman, Brunson, and Vernuccio, Inside the News.